Are you having a hard time understanding the basics of tracking your cycle? If you are, you're not alone. Many women, including myself, got zero to slim education on this in school or from our moms. We were essentially just told that you can get pregnant if you have sex, and if you get a period, that means that you're not. But there is so much more to it. And when we are trying to conceive, tracking your cycle and knowing your body, even if we're doing IVF, is a critical piece to this puzzle. Join Dr. Trisha Zehrung, nurse practitioner and fertility consultant, and I as we dive deep into understanding the parts of our cycles, methods to track your cycle, what is quote unquote normal during your period, and what our periods tell us. We'll also cover best practices to maximize conception during ovulation and throughout your whole cycle. Essentially, all the things you should have learned in 7th grade, plus some gems only Dr. Tricia could give us. Welcome to the True Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Leah Nicole Trujillo, therapist turned fertility emotional wellness coach, and I'm here to share the tools that helped me and my clients reclaim their joy, unpause their lives, and triple their pregnancy rates. With a 100% success rate in emotional well-being and a 60% pregnancy rate, I'm here to radically transform your journey. Join me and my amazing guests for expert strategies, practical tips, and real-life trying to conceive stories with a dash of girl talk. So let's sprinkle some baby dust because it's time for true fertility. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the True Fertility Podcast. I am here today with my new friend, Dr. Trisha Zehrung. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it was Zierung, but somewhere along the lineage, they changed it. Fun fact about my last name.
Wow, that is so interesting. I actually met Dr. Trisha on a Facebook group for women's practitioners. And she really raised her hand right off the bat as far as wanting to talk about today's subject, which is cycle tracking. She is an expert on that. After experiencing her own fertility struggles, Dr. Tricia decided to change the traditional fertility narrative and help busy couples optimize their fertility and fast track their path to parenthood through natural and holistic solutions. Dr. Tricia is a doctorally prepared nurse practitioner turned fertility consultant with 12 plus years of clinical experience. Dr. Tricia has also presented at conferences and is a published author in numerous journals, including Nurse Educator. That is a very impressive bio, Miss Dr. Tricia.
I thank you.
Yes, I love that. And again, as I mentioned, we're pretty much new friends, new colleagues. And I was taking a look, and I am so excited that I got to have you on today's show, because just looking at your information and your stuff, you have just such a wealth of information coming from so many different angles to help support your follow. And I really love that you have a truly holistic approach to supporting people moving forward. So again, thank you for all that you do and for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you and what you're doing for women as well.
Yeah. Let's have a moment to get to know Dr. Tricia a little bit deeper. So I have a few questions for you. I call them my rapid fire questions, and I like to do 3 questions with each guest that I have on. Are you ready for that?
I'm so ready.
First question, I wanted to know, are you a hat girl or not?
I am like a wannabe hat girl.
Wannabe.
I wish I could wear hats. I have friends who wear hats. I want to be able to wear the hat. But every time I put the hat on, I'm like, no, it isn't it?
It's not working, huh? That is so funny because the reason I asked you this question, it seems like an awkward question to ask, right? Probably. And sorry, listeners, if that sounds weird, but when looking at her Instagram, I see these beautiful pictures of Dr. Tricia. And honestly, I don't know why I could so envision like one of those flat, wide brim, stylish hats that have that hipstery vibe. I could so see that literally on like multiple pictures, even though it's not there. I could just envision it there and it looking amazing. So that's why I had to ask.
Now and go buy one of those.
Yeah. Yes, definitely on the next list. And I don't know why I'm envisioning like a chocolatey color for you.
Maybe you should just take over my Amazon. You can order me one.
Right? Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that with us. A next question I had for you is I noticed also that you do share some of your workouts, or at least have that going on in the background with some of the great information you share. It looks like you have a home gym. So I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite type of workout? And were you always into this?
Yeah, for me, my favorite type of workout is like a HIIT or CrossFit style workout. Our home gym has the racks, we have the dumbbells, we have the barbells, we've got it all. I follow programming called street parking, which is literally called street parking because your gym is in your garage, so you have to park in the street. It's an online community, but I've been a part of that community for a long time. And even prior to that, I did CrossFit. So it's been a big part of my life. Movement in general and working out I've known that is an important aspect of health for a long time.
Yeah, that is so cool. I'm always amazed by people who do CrossFit. I've tried it one time. I'm definitely not afraid of strength training in general. I'm not a fan of cardio. I'll just say that. So I feel like CrossFit was like cardio plus strength training for me, at least the one that I went to. Is that how you feel like it is as well, in a way?
Yes, it definitely is sometimes. And I would be lying if I said I didn't cherry pick sometimes to exclude the running workouts.
No. Yeah, but I couldn't keep up with the people. It was just so fast, and they were just like it was just like so much weight so fast, and I was just like, "I can't do this. I can't."
You're your own competition, no one else.
That is true. I love that. That's a great reminder. Oh, thanks for sharing about the CrossFit information. A last question I had for you is I also noticed that you do tend to share about your faith and kind of where God fits in on the fertility process, which I don't really often see very much in other practitioners who specialize in fertility. So, can you share your thoughts about that and how you feel like it has helped other women on this journey?
Of course. So, because I've been through my own fertility struggles, like I know you read my bio and there's some probably, like you said, impressive things in there. I think the most impressive thing is the fact that I've been there and that I've gone through those struggles, just like the couples that I'm working with. And I've done the spiraling out of control and trying to control things that I couldn't. And once I really let go and let God take control and realize that He is in control, there was the level of peace that just doesn't make sense. And I think that for any of my clients that I can, or even my followers, that I can help them find that peace, even if they're not getting pregnant yet, I want to share that. I want to share that gift that I was given.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So you're really not holding back at all and really sharing everything that really helped you personally on this journey. I wanted you to share with the listeners how you got to doing what you do now, like a little bit about your background and what path led you to your current role.
Yeah, I became a nurse practitioner in 2015. And shortly after that, my husband and I, we had gotten married and we decided we were ready to start trying to have a baby. And our first month of trying, we actually did get pregnant. And that was met with a miscarriage. And that was not even on my radar at all as a practitioner. It just wasn't something that I even really learned about in school all that much. It was because like we touched on it and then moved on. And so I didn't know anybody who had a miscarriage and I'm a talker. So I just started sharing it
Mm.
because at first I was like suffering alone. I'm going to talk to people about it and I don't care if it makes them awkward, but I'm tired of pretending that I'm fine.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I had one too.
Yeah.
And more people shared that and they appreciated that I was open with it because then they could share it with me. And then I went on to have my son. And when we decided we want to try again, we were living in Japan. I was met with two more back to back miscarriages. And I had to really push for no one cared, especially because I had a son in between the miscarriages. They were like, you have to have more. And I'm like, so you're telling me I have to lose more babies before anyone would care? And it didn't sit well with me.
Yeah.
And of course, I started doing my own research about how I could optimize my fertility, figure out what was going on, and did my own, started going down my own rabbit holes of research and figuring this out for myself, all the while knowing that I knew I needed to do something in this space so women didn't have to feel the way that I was feeling in that moment. So alone and just isolated, and no one really wanted to help me. And so that kind of is where things started to grow. And anyway, I went on and had my daughter, who I now realize is a miracle baby because I did have low progesterone, and my progesterone with her was only 5. And that's really
Wow.
not sustainable for a pregnancy at all. So she's my little miracle.
And
And then
and
I
how
came back
did
to,
you know that then?
so
Did
I
you
had
order your own test?
finally got I had been seeing a previous doctor on base, and I finally found this gem of a doctor who finally listened to me, and he started doing some of the workup. He did not cover all the bases by any means, but he did test my progesterone 7 days past ovulation. And it was the same cycle that I got. It was only 5. And I actually didn't even look at any. I like went back later and looked at it, and thank God, because
Yeah.
otherwise I would have been a nervous wreck. Yeah, so that is how I discovered that. And so I came back to America. We decided we want to have a third child. We tried again, and I experienced another miscarriage. So this was my 4th miscarriage. And finally, I went to the fertility clinic and was like, this is what's wrong with me. This is what we're going to do. And they were like, "Okay."
Oh,
And now I have my 3rd son. He's almost 2.
wow. What a story. I'm so sorry, though, for your losses and for the experience that you had to go through. And again, just getting some basic workup or just getting somebody to at least ask you, like, hey, let's dig a little bit deeper. And especially, and you're experiencing this as being a nurse practitioner. So it's a little disheartening to hear that was your experience, but I'm so proud of you for pushing forward and seeking answers no matter what the cost. So I'm really happy that everything turned out well and you have your 3 beautiful babies. And I'm again so sorry for your other losses.
Thank you. And I knew that when this was all happening, of course, you like don't know why it's happening to you, and there's so many questions, but at this point in my life, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for those experiences, and our life experiences is what our pain is what leads us to our ministry, and I think that was it for me.
Yeah, totally. I can totally relate to you on that one. And I'm sure I'll continue to get to know you personally moving forward. But I wanted to get into the meat of what we are going to be talking about today, and that is cycle tracking. I had been getting some various requests about this, and I think it's such an interesting topic. And I feel like there's so much contradictory information out there about what is the best methods. Um, it's just going back to basics and what we need to know as women going through a period, experiencing a cycle that we really weren't taught, or if it was taught to us, it was a very quick synopsis. So, hopefully, today we will answer all of your questions about understanding your cycle and monitoring that. Yeah, all of the great information that Dr. Trisha knows about this stuff. I wanted to start first with, can you explain the phases of our cycle and what our body is really doing in each? I think that's a great baseline for our discussion today.
Yeah, so knowing your cycle is really like step 1 of trying to conceive, right? If you don't understand your cycle, it's really hard to become pregnant because all of that timing stands on that. When we talk about your cycle, we have 4 different phases. The menstrual phase, we have the follicular phase, we have the ovulatory phase, and then we have the luteal phase. Because of the way it plays out, I'm going to talk about the menstrual phase last because it's really a culmination of what has happened the whole rest of the cycle.
Okay.
When we are going into the follicular phase after the bleeding phase, those hormones are at their baseline between day 2 and day 5. And from there, they start to do like an intricate dance. Okay. So as the follicles start to develop, that estrogen starts to rise. The FSH starts to rise as well because that's the follicle stimulating hormone.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is on the ovaries, those eggs are starting to develop. And as that happens, those estrogen levels and the FSH levels and the testosterone level are starting to rise. One of those follicles, or maybe more than one, that's what happens when we have twins, right? But usually just one follicle will reach maturation. And the LH, or the luteinizing hormone, will then surge once that follicle is mature and ready to release. So that LH surge happens, and that is what you detect when you use like an ovulation predictor kit. So that LH hormone surges, follicle breaks open, and egg releases. Egg then gets swept up into the fallopian tube where it will hopefully become fertilized. Once that LH surge and that egg releases from the follicle, that's the ovulatory phase.
Mm-hmm.
Then we transition into the luteal phase. That follicle that egg was released from collapses on itself.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes what's called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is what produces the progesterone. And progesterone is like the shining hormone of the luteal phase. So the estrogen levels drop off and the progesterone levels take over. What that progesterone does is that progesterone is really important for preparing the uterine lining for that fertilized egg to be able to implant, become an embryo, and grow into a baby.
Mm-hmm.
So that corpus luteum is the only thing really providing that progesterone to maintain that luteal phase, create the lining, make sure it's all ready so that egg can implant. If egg does not implant, then we have the drop off of progesterone, and then we have the shedding of the lining, which is your menstrual cycle.
Wow, what a beautiful, as you mentioned, symphony. And it's really interesting to me how the follicle is basically a dual purpose. Our bodies are really smart as far as making sure we're utilizing all of our resources. Is there growing the egg and being responsive to the estrogen, right? And the
Mhm.
FSH. And then, as you mentioned, it turns into the thing that's going to help spur and develop your uterine lining. So that is really cool that it does all of that. And thank you for explaining that. As you mentioned at one point during your explanation, that's when the ovulation predictor kits come in. So I wanted to talk a little bit first about like how can really like that is one form of cycle tracking, but how can cycle tracking then help you get pregnant and how effective is doing something like that?
Yeah, ovulation predictor kits can be very helpful, but it's literally just one small piece of the cycle tracking puzzle. So when you know how to tell when ovulation is coming, then you're able to track those, you're going to be probably a lot more successful at conceiving because you know that timing versus just trusting like maybe a free fertility app that says you ovulate on day 14 and everybody in the world ovulates on day 14, which is not true.
Mhm.
You're going to increase your success by being able to track those signs. What I mean by tracking those signs is like your cervical fluid. You can also track cervical position and basal body temperature. So, cervical fluid and basal body temperature is what I usually, the two that I really lean in on for my clients. And you can do that in a multiple different ways. There's different just thermometers and things like that. But it's really just paying attention to the signs that your body is giving you that ovulation is coming and then that ovulation has happened. Because just because you get a positive LH strip does not mean you actually ovulated. And that can be really confusing for some people and they don't actually know that. They think that, oh, I'm getting positive LH strip. That means I ovulated, but it actually doesn't.
Hmm. That's so interesting. So it's possible for your LH to be high even though you didn't ovulate.
So take PCOS, for instance. Women with PCOS have higher levels of estrogen and their body will continue to try to have LH surges to ovulate, but there's no mature egg. They have tons of eggs
Mm.
on their ovaries, but none of them are getting mature enough to actually ovulate. But their body will continue to try to ovulate. And so they'll have maybe continuous LH surges where they'll see it's always positive, or it was positive, then it's negative, then it's positive again. And that is a good example of a time when LH strips aren't really super reliable.
Wow, that's so interesting. So, as you mentioned, your preferred method is tracking the cervical mucus. And you said cervical something else. What was that?
Cervical fluid and your basal body temperature.
Okay, cervical fluid and the basal body temperature. Can you get a little more in depth as far as how you track or what you're looking for cervical mucus?
Cervical fluid will go through kind of stages. And you can use this also if you're trying to prevent pregnancy too. So you can use it either way, just getting to know your body. What you'll usually notice first is this like a sticky sort of cervical fluid. And that's the first sign that your body is starting to get ready. The whole purpose of the cervical fluid is that the vagina is like a hostile environment to sperm.
Oh, really?
Um, the pH is too acidic that it will actually kill off the sperm unless it has the cervical fluid to keep it alive because the cervical fluid is more basic, closer to neutral, like 7 pH. So that clear or that sticky stuff is like the first sign that you might be getting close to ovulation. And that's usually where I start to say, all right, let's start doing like sexual intercourse every day, every other day to every couple of days. Then it should start to maybe become creamy. And then you're going to see what I call egg white cervical fluid, which is exactly what it sounds like. It looks like egg whites. It's sticky. It can stretch up to an inch. Don't be afraid to touch it and check it out. That is how
Yeah.
you learn.
Uh-huh.
That means it's go time, right?
Okay.
And that is what will really help carry the sperm to the egg. It helps expedite the process. It helps keep it alive. It can actually, there's even research that shows it can make slight like genetic modifications to help with the sperm. Our bodies are so fascinating.
Cool. And it's weird to think that, okay, yes, let's say you ovulated. How does your body know to produce this specific type of cervical mucus in coordination with that or in conjunction?
Yeah. You know what I believe? The Lord planned it all from the beginning.
Uh-huh. Has infertility taken too much from you? Are you unsure how you can keep going on this path? Maybe you've tried some affirmations, but it's just not cutting it. If this sounds like you need the Resilience Roadmap for Trying to Conceive. It's a free step-by-step guide to reclaim your joy and unpause your life that I use with clients to get unparalleled results. Get yours today by going to www.leanicolecoaching.com. That's LEANICOLE coaching.com, or check the show notes for the link.
But so that cervical fluid is what you want to keep an eye on and track. And once you start seeing that egg white cervical fluid, you want to make sure that you're having intercourse. Usually around that like sticky cervical fluid is also when I recommend starting LH strips if you're going to be doing LH strips. And then for the basal body temperature, what that does is you take your temperature, literally it's what it sounds like. You're taking your temperature first thing in the morning before your feet hit the ground, before your eyeballs pop open. You're taking an excuse to take like maybe 5 more minutes of rest and relaxation before you hit the ground running, and you pop a thermometer in your mouth and take your basal body temperature. It's basically your resting temperature. And what that looks like is you check it throughout the entire month so that you can see what your baseline is before you ovulate. And what you want to see is that temp rises after ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is indicative of ovulation. And that tells us a lot about your progesterone levels, because indirectly progesterone, as it rises, it increases our body temperature. That's what it does. So that's how we can indirectly measure progesterone. Of course, there's ways to do it with urine and serum testing as well. And if you are concerned that there's an issue, it's definitely recommended to get some serum testing. But we can pick up on issues just by using basal body temperature.
Wow, that is really cool. And so, like with the basal body temperature, you mentioned you have to be at rest, right? If you happen, because realistically, you're doing this every single day, will that like skew the results if you've already stood up?
Yeah, it will. Your temperature will probably be like higher than it probably really would have been. There's also other things like eating a big meal before bed or drinking alcohol that can also falsely raise your temperature. Of course, being sick. So there can be some fluctuation, but as you do it and you learn what your chart looks like, you will see the patterns and you'll be able to tell pretty easily your ovulation. Now, it is more difficult for people who are like shift workers. It can be done. If you are a chronic forgetter, there's options like, for instance, I use the Aura Ring. So you can use the Aura Ring, which I don't have to remember to do it. It just automatically syncs from the app. There's things like Temp Drop where you put it on before you go to bed. So there are other options. They're just more expensive. You can just use a good old $14 thermometer too.
Oh, okay. Cool to know that there's various options. So you're saying, like, for instance, the example you gave was your ring. So that will take your temperature reading without you having to do anything then.
Yeah. So it senses my temperature on my skin and it senses the time and how, I don't know, it's very techy. So I don't know exactly how it works, but somehow it detects probably by heart rate when I've woken up. So it will go back and use the temperature before I woke up. And of course, same thing. If you're up a lot during the night, it can be a little skewed, but it is pretty accurate. And then it will just go straight to my app and sync. And I like the Aura Ring because it tracks my sleep and my stress levels too, which is
Hmm.
always good to keep an eye on when you're trying to conceive as well.
Definitely. Okay, so again, you shared there's various ways, and from what I understand you saying is it's good to look at all of them together to give you all of the pieces of information and make the most informed and have the most information to determine when you are ovulating. You can use the ovulation predictor strips, but probably not best in isolation. You definitely want to pay attention to your cervical mucus. And when it's really, really stretchy, really sticky, that's a really great clue. And then additionally, that basal body temperature, when it has that dip, that's when you're ovulating, right?
Yeah, you'll see like a slight dip but right at ovulation, and then you'll see a temperature rise. So you
Okay.
want to see that sustained rise. And that is usually approximately 12 to 16 days because that's how long the average luteal phase is. And this is another good thing is when you start doing this, if you're finding that each month maybe your luteal phase is less than 12 days, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 9, that is actually a sign that you have a luteal phase defect. And so you'll pick up on something like that a lot sooner if you're tracking.
Okay. Yeah. And so those apps, then just to clarify, those apps that say, okay, you're scheduled to ovulate this day, just purely based on like when you last had your period, and then I think it normally asks how long is your period in general, or what is your cycle regularly. Those aren't really a good way to go then.
They're just guessing. They
Okay.
can only be as smart as the data that you're giving it. So a lot of them, like for instance, pre-mom, the more data you give it, the more accurate it will get.
Mhm.
If you start charting your cervical fluid, if you start charting your basal body temperature, it's going to pick up patterns of what your luteal phase length is because that
Mhm.
really doesn't change. You stuff can happen, stress, like travel from time zones, sickness, things like that can extend the follicular phase every once in a while, but that luteal phase really doesn't change. Once you ovulate, that time for you is usually pretty much pinpoint the same plus or minus maybe a day. But when you first sign up for an app like that, or if you have an app that maybe you can't put a lot of data into or it doesn't use that data to make predictions, then they're just guessing. They're going to probably generically pick a time. Say you have a 28-day cycle, they're just generically picking day 14 as your ovulation so that you have 14 days after ovulation.
Okay. Yeah. So as we're talking about cycles and cycle length, what is a normal cycle length?
Yeah, so a normal cycle length can definitely vary per person. What's normal for you may be different for somebody else. Usually, anywhere from 24 to 35 days can be considered normal, but not 24 days 1 month, 35 days the next month, 28 days the next month.
Hmm.
That is too much variation. But if your cycle is usually 24 days and it's 24 days pretty much every month, that can be completely regular and normal for you.
And so, what if there's a time where you miss a cycle, or again, as you mentioned, it is too long or too short? What is that meaning? Does that mean like you're not ovulating? What is it telling us?
It can. I always tell people if especially if you're tracking, it can give you a lot of peace of mind when you get that late cycle and you're like, "Where is my period? Why is it not here?" Like, and negative pregnancy tests and you're like panicking like, "What's wrong with me?"
Hmm.
Every once in a while, you can have something happen where maybe you have an illness. Like I have had clients who are like, "Oh my gosh, my period's late." I'm like, "Were you sick?" And they were like, "Oh yeah." And I'm like, "Yeah, you probably delayed ovulation because you were sick or
Hmm.
you did a lot of travel, especially across time zones, or you were really stressed,
Hmm.
or you were drinking alcohol. Sometimes that can even delay ovulation. So there's different things that can affect ovulation.
Hmm.
If consistently you're having irregular cycles or you're skipping cycles, that is probably a sign that either you're having difficulty ovulating or you're not ovulating at all, which of course you can't get pregnant if you're not ovulating. So
Hmm.
we definitely need to dive deeper into that and see what's the underlying cause there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's possible, though, again, as you mentioned, delayed ovulation, even if it's delayed or our cycle's a little bit off, it's still possible to get pregnant at that time. We just need to be tracking our cycle and to know when even though it's not on the exact day we normally do, it's still definitely possible, and it's likely that we're ovulating still, depending on your
Yeah.
markers.
Yes, for those things, yes.
Mhm.
Now, if you are constantly ovulating very late in the cycle, that can actually compromise egg quality too. So it can still be a concern. But again, it's more of that if it's happening consistently versus 1 month you had a stressful event or you had
Yeah.
a cold and you delayed ovulation, it's not as concerning.
Yeah, and that happens to everyone. That's kind of life. But yeah, as you mentioned, we want to pay attention to the overall pattern. And if this is something that's consistently happening to us, we need to really take a step back and see what could be contributing to that.
Yeah. And with the shorter cycles too, some women have shorter cycles, and it can also be a sign of premature ovarian insufficiency or the start of perimenopause. And so that's something we want to look into as well. Not something that you want to just sit on because your doctor told you had to wait a year.
Mhm.
Those are exceptions outside of the norm of that rule.
Such helpful information to know. So, with that, now that we've talked about how to know when you are ovulating and you're like, okay, that looks great, I'm ready to go, what days are most likely for conception to happen once we know, okay, I think I'm ovulating today?
Yeah, if you're ovulating, you definitely want to have intercourse that day because there's high chances if you've confirmed ovulation and you know that is happening, that's good timing. You can get pregnant anywhere within a 5-day window of ovulation, right? Because we
Uh-huh.
know that with good quality cervical fluid, the sperm can live up to 5 days. So your efforts aren't wasted prior to that. And everyone is a little bit different based on recommendations. It also depends on what the semen analysis looks like. If they have a low sperm count, sometimes we'll let them develop a little bit more fully and give a little bit more time in between intercourse. I usually recommend once they notice that first cervical fluid every other day to every couple of days. Once they notice that egg white cervical fluid, maybe ramp it up just a little bit, maybe every other day. And then when they have that LH strip positive or they know they're going to be ovulating that day, to have intercourse that day as well as the next day, because if LH strip does not mean you're ovulating that day, right? Strip means you're ovulating within the next like 12 to 36 hours. So then the next day would be actual ovulation day. And then the following day, the egg can actually live up to 12 to 24 hours. So you still have a chance. So it doesn't have to be every single day there, but try to hit somewhere in that window and you're going to increase your chances.
Definitely. And speaking of, as you mentioned, like a 5-day window. So, how long are sperm alive and impossible and have the possibility to penetrate the egg?
Yeah. So, like, even say you had intercourse 4 days before ovulation, it could still be one of those sperm that penetrate the egg, technically, especially if something happens. I was a military spouse. My husband's just in the reserves now. But, like, sometimes with military spouses, like, there's only so much under your control. Don't feel like you have zero chance just because you can't time that exact ovulation day. You still have a chance because those sperm can live up to 5 days.
Have
Yeah.
the ability to get you that long.
Days later.
Yeah. And thanks for clarifying that it doesn't necessarily have to be like 24/7 every single day. It was funny, actually. I was watching a reality TV show. If you know me, I really love like the love reality TV shows, my
Guilty
vice.
pleasure.
And I was watching 90 Day Fiance, and she was like, one of the characters or people on the show was like, so if we're trying to get pregnant, I have to have sex with you 3 times a day, 3 times a day. So that is not correct. Dr. Trish shared that it is absolutely not necessary.
But in reality, I'm sure you probably see it with your clients as well. There can be a lot of pressure around that intimate time that's supposed to be enjoyable. And so when we tell people like, no, you don't have to perform 3 times a day, just enjoy yourselves and enjoy the process because that can cause stress alone.
Definitely. Um, a question here. Is there anything that we should be doing? We're talking again about the time in our period in which we are ovulating, but is there anything that we should be doing in other phases of our cycle to maximize our chances?
Yeah, one, of course, simple as anything is hydrating because if you're not hydrated, you're not going to have good cervical fluid. So you want to make sure you're hydrated in the follicular phase. Just general health recommendations of eating well and moving your body and resting when you feel like you need rest and reducing stress and getting a good sleep routine down. All of that is really going to help you throughout and create an optimal cycle so that you can conceive.
Can you talk about then, again, going back to the phases, how does your body change, like physically and maybe energy wise, for each phase? And should we maybe adjust certain things that we're doing dependent on the phase? Like, for instance, exercise.
Yeah. So cycle syncing is really huge right now. There's lots of buzz about it. I might not land exactly where some people do because I've heard some crazy extremes. So I might be debunking some things. I don't know. But when it comes to cycle syncing, there is definitely some truth to that. We feel differently throughout our cycle, right? Men are on a 24-hour hormone cycle. They feel pretty consistent, like day to day.
Mm-hmm.
We are not.
Mm-hmm.
We are on a monthly cycle. So we feel differently in the follicular phase than we feel in the luteal phase. And so what the follicular phase usually looks is that estrogen and that testosterone is rising. We're having increased levels of energy. It's a great time to do like really important work meetings or things that you really need those creative juices flowing. The closer that you get to ovulation, you can become really creative. Of course, your sexual drive is going to increase because that is gearing you towards trying to procreate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your workouts will probably feel better. You might feel like those hit um, heavy strength training workouts are really in your wheelhouse during that time. And then we ovulate and then we transfer into a totally different phase where maybe we feel like relaxation is the key. Our body really craves those complex carbohydrates. So we can even eat a little bit differently in that luteal phase than we did in the follicular phase. We maybe are a little bit more emotional. Sometimes, as the closer we get to our period, we maybe feel a little bit like the world's going to end. That's your hormones.
Yeah.
And so it's not a great time to put a lot of stress on yourself. It's not
Mm-hmm.
the best time to maybe do the hardest workout and push yourself past your comfort zones. You do that when you work out. That's the whole point of working out, right? But not maybe to the extreme. Now, I'm not telling you not to work out. Some people out there will be like, don't work out in your follicular phase, don't lift weights, don't do anything. And there's no scientific proof to that.
Mm-hmm.
You need to do what feels good for your body, of
Yeah.
course, but who can ever maintain consistency working 2 weeks out of the month?
Yeah.
You'll never maintain consistency like that. So maybe HIIT doesn't feel as great certain days. So some
Mm-hmm.
days I'm doing like a lighter strength training. Some days I'm doing more yoga or just walking,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm listening to my body. And so those are how those phases can differ. And if you really start to tune in, you'll feel it.
Yeah.
You'll feel the difference.
Yeah. And to just really honor what your body is trying to tell
Mhm.
you. And again, you don't have to push it if you're not feeling it all at that particular time of your cycle. So, yeah, thank you for explaining that too. This is something that just popped in my head right now, but you were talking about how men are on a 24-hour hormone cycle. I have heard, and if I'm going to ask anyone, it's going to be you because we're talking about cycles. I have heard that if you spend a lot of time with other women, your cycles can actually sync or
Yeah.
align. But have you ever heard, or I've also heard about men technically having a period in a way, or like they're into the same phases as their wives or significant others?
Honestly, I have never heard that. But you have heard like of husbands experiencing like the pregnancy symptoms, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's probably very similar. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's more of, I don't know. I don't know that there's any science to it, but my guess would be that it's more psychological than it is hormonal, but it maybe.
Maybe that's another area for science to explore at some
I'm
point.
going to
But
go ask my husband to
yeah,
see, hey, do you ever experience waves of emotion like I do? I
I
don't
don't
think he
know.
does.
You're like, nah.
It's pretty even keel.
Yeah. Okay. The next thing I wanted to ask you too about is during menstruation, what to look for the quality of our period. Is there any red flags within our actual blood? If it's heavy bleeding, if it's light, if we maybe see clots, colors.
Yeah. Despite probably what you've been told by your doctor, heavy periods, cramping that's making you miss work or miss activities is not normal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and historically, women have just been given birth control for that.
I was just
Um,
about to say that. Yeah, that's normally when they say, let's just put you on birth control.
yeah. And all that has done is mask an underlying issue
Mm-hmm.
that could have been dealt with prior to these poor women then coming off of it and trying to conceive. And it probably honestly has put them in a worse place. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for birth control, because there is. We need to dive deep and understand why that's happening first before we just cover it up, the birth control pill.
Yeah.
But yes, that is a red flag. It can be a multitude of things. It could be fibroids. It could be endometriosis. It could be things contributing to an estrogen dominance picture. There's actually some bacteria that can produce what's called beta-glucuronidase and cause that activity to be elevated. And what it does is it actually allows toxins that your liver is trying to detox to reabsorb into your system. And I see a lot of women experiencing like heavier periods when they have that beta-glucuronidase level. And it also worsens endometriosis. So there's a big tie-in there. And so I see that a lot with my clients when we do further testing. And then on the other side, if your period is really light or you're barely having a period, that's problematic as well, because it could be a multitude of things of where maybe that uterine lining is not thickening enough. And so you're not having much of a bleed because you're not getting a thick lining, which you can't, fertilized egg cannot implant if the lining is thick enough and prepared enough. So that can be a sign of an issue. It could also be a sign of a septate uterus where there's not enough blood flow to the uterus, which is also going to possibly prevent pregnancy from happening. A lot of women also experience spotting prior to their cycle starting.
Yeah.
So they'll have spotting for a couple of days before their period actually starts full flow. And that can actually be a sign of progesterone issues as well.
Interesting. So our periods are definitely telling us signs. What are the colors though? Because I've had a couple of different, I think it was an acupuncturist who was like asking me about colors of period and was pretty interested in that. Are you interested in getting the answer to this question? Well, this is your personal invite to join our exclusive Facebook group to dive deeper into the world of fertility with bonus clips, behind-the-scenes content, and intimate discussions. Here you can connect with fellow tribe members, share your experiences, and contribute your insights to shape the future of the show. And it's easy to join. Just search True Fertility Tribe on Facebook, answer a few questions, and you're in. I also have the direct link in the show notes below. See you there. Good to know. But what does your cycle, is that like a marker for your overall health or fertility?
Yeah. So for everything we've talked about, you can really tell like your cycle is almost like another vital sign, right? It really is. It tells you so much about your overall health. And if there's something that is anything that we talked about that's shooting up a red flag for you, that like, oh, wait, this isn't quite normal, it's not the time to cover it up with like Band-Aid fixes like we were talking about. It's a time to investigate further, because if we were experiencing abdominal pain, we wouldn't just be like, oh, okay, that doesn't mean anything. No, we'd be concerned that there was something more going on. Same with our cycle. If something is abnormal and falls out of that normal range, we want to investigate it. We don't want to cover it up.
Yeah, exactly. It's, again, as you mentioned, another vital sign essentially. So if we do feel like there's maybe our periods out of whack in one of these areas, whether it's length, whether it's the quality of their period, is there anything that you generally suggest to do to improve the consistency and maybe the quality of your period and your cycle?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different routes you can go. And I think it depends on what is abnormal for you. So I think across the board, nutrition, movement, some basic strategic supplementation there, decreasing stress, optimizing sleep can really go a long way for a lot of different of these concerns. However, some of them might need more strategic supplement. If you're not ovulating, then we need to hone in on something like myo-inositol that is proven to really help restore ovulation in women who have PCOS. So we're not just putting you on a supplement for the rest of your life, but let's figure out why. Now, of course, myo-inositol versus Clomid, myo-inositol is going to address the underlying issue of insulin resistance and restore ovulation, whereas Clomid is just forcing your body to ovulate.
Yeah.
We still want to have a good understanding of why we're doing what we're doing, right? Because who's going to do something if they don't know why they're doing it? They're just going to probably be like, I don't know if that's really working or not. And then they'll stop it before it really has a chance to work.
Yeah, exactly. It's really just more about understanding our own bodies and again, why we're doing certain things to help our bodies to be more in line, to be more in sync, to be more fertile. At what point then do you recommend maybe seeing a specialist if you're worried about your cycle?
I think if you're worried about your cycle and you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I don't think what I'm experiencing is normal, then now's the time. If it's causing you stress, then you have every right and access to medical care to have that visit and have that workup. I truly, wholeheartedly believe that, but you might have to advocate for yourself a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you totally on that. I think sometimes they're like, how long have you been trying? And it's, oh, if it hasn't been the threshold of 6 versus a year, depending on your age, they push back. Or then also, if you're not trying, but you just notice some significant
Yeah.
differences with your cycle, that can be a little bit
Yeah.
of a hurdle. So I appreciate you saying that you're going
Yeah.
to probably might have to advocate at certain points too.
And you shouldn't, if something here is falling outside of the normal, it is basic education that they follow traditional medicine. If you're under 35, this is what the reproductive standards are, unless something is abnormal, which includes not ovulating, luteal phase defects, any sign of anything not being normal if you fall outside of that norm. So don't let yourself get pushed aside because that is their standard too.
Is there anything else you wanted to share with us about cycles? Or the cycle, anything
Yeah.
you felt we feel like we missed? I'm sure you have a wealth of
Um,
information out there, but
Oh, I know. I feel like I'm probably gonna go to bed tonight and be reeling about like this and that or the other that I forgot to talk about. But really, yeah, there was something that I was thinking about and now I can't remember what it was.
okay. Well, for our listeners, is there a way that you would prefer for them to connect with you or possibly work with you? Can you share that with us?
I'm best found over on Instagram at my handle is at Trisha Zehrung, my first and last name. And I'm also on TikTok at Trisha_Zierung. If you want to work with me, if you head on over to Instagram, I have a link in my bio that has an application. I also have a nice little offer for you guys today for listening and just to show my appreciation.
Yes. So I have here that if you use the code is podcast, you'll get $100 off. Is this your package or
This is my self-paced program. So it's an automated course that they can go on their own journey with and have it for lifetime. So it can walk them through all of those fertility foundations that we talked about. It goes into much detail, like I just went into on cycle tracking, but also goes into the why that we just talked about, how to do it, how it all fits together. It goes into nutrition, movement, decreasing toxins to help optimize your fertility, how to optimize your stress and sleep, how to optimize your spiritual health when you're on your fertility journey. And it also has a bonus module talking about gut health, insulin resistance, and inflammation, and how those can impact fertility as well.
thank you for sharing that discount code with the listeners today.
Of course.
It has been such a joy talking with you today, Dr. Tricia. Thank you again so much for your time and your insight on cycles. Again, I feel like we need to just share this podcast at every middle school almost.
Yes.
So are a little more prepared for life and womanhood. But again, thank you again. Take care and good night. Thank you for allowing me to share these stories, information, and tips with you, or really just allowing me to connect with you on a subject that's so dear and important to your life. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and do me a solid and share this with your friends or anyone that you think might benefit from hearing this. Also, I'd love it if you could leave a rating or review for a deeper dive on today's episode, bonus content, and to connect with others in this space. I invite you to join True Fertility Tribe Facebook group. And last but not least, let's be friends on Instagram where I post almost daily. You can find me at True Fertility. Wishing you all baby dust. Till next time. Bye.